Thank you so much, everyone. There's a couple people whose names I recognize, and I actually have some people who work in my program on the call today. So I imagine they're going to be heckling me if I say anything wrong. I also see that I've just come from a 2-hour Zoom meeting, and I see that there are some people who have just come from the same meeting working on domestic violence issues here in the state of New Mexico. I am Rosemary Cosgrove Aguilar. I am a judge with the Bernalillo County Metropolitan Court. I am a criminal court judge, and we handle everything from parking tickets to DWI thirds. Our court is the busiest court in the state of New Mexico. We have, well, in the before times, we would have hundreds of people come to our courthouse every day in order to get the judicial services that they need. I've been at the Metropolitan Court for 8 years. My prior, it seems like a lifetime ago, but my prior experience was 10 years as a domestic violence hearing officer in the family court of the district court here in Albuquerque, doing mainly orders of protection, child custody decisions and recommendations to the judges regarding domestic violence issues. So I have been working as my legal career in domestic violence for almost 20 years. And then when I was an attorney, my volunteer work was in the field of domestic violence. So this is something I feel incredibly passionate about. This is work I think is incredibly important. And thank you all for the work that you're doing, wherever you're doing it, in order to make families in New Mexico safer. I've been asked today to speak about one particular aspect of the work that I do. And that work is, we have specialty courts here at the Metropolitan Court. We have many specialty courts. The concept behind specialty courts is the idea that you can solve more issues for people, keeping them out of custody and providing counseling and support than you can by just having people in jail. It's actually, you could have better outcomes, and it's also less expensive. And so the specialty courts are sometimes called drug courts or treatment courts. And there are national standards and now New Mexico standards about what a treatment court should look like, what needs to be done, what rules should be followed, and what are best practices. I have 3 specialty courts here at the Bernalillo County Court. One of them I have found with the help of some former students of mine, which was the PAW Court, which is a pre-adjudication animal welfare court, using counseling, following the Anacare model, which was adopted from the Batterers Intervention Program model for people who are neglectful or abusive of animals. And I won't say too much about that, but I'm sure all of you know and recognize that there is a incredible link between animal abuse and domestic violence. And we're trying to use our PAW court to give people the tools to stop abusing animals or being neglectful of animals. On the other 2 courts that I have, also domestic violence related, the one is called the Early Intervention Program, or EIP. And this program is used for low risk, low needs offenders for 6 months or 1 year's worth of counseling, monitoring by probation, and compliance with the requirements of the program. Again, this is for low risk, low needs people. They don't meet with me during the year. They meet with the probation officer we have here at Metro, and they are in counseling depending on how they're assessed for 24 or 36 weeks. They may also have specific counseling for drug or alcohol problems. And again, people are screened before they're allowed into the early intervention program, and they are to be low risk, low need offenders. We have, we get input from the alleged victim in those cases to make sure that we're putting people in the program who are, this is their first time in the criminal justice system for domestic violence. The one program I'm going to speak with you about a little bit more in depth today is the Domestic Violence Solutions Treatment and Education Program. And we are lucky to have today joining in 3 of the folks who are more important than I am for making sure that the ongoing DV STEP program here at Bernalillo County at the Metropolitan Court works well. We have Dan Flores of A New Awakenings, who is on the call, as well as 2 employees of the Metropolitan Court, Janae Hernandez, who's our probation officer, and Javier Arreta, who is our program manager. And they are the frontline folks who are working with our DV STEP participants. I say this a lot. If someone had ever told me that the best part of my job would be working with domestic violence offenders, I would have told you you were crazy. But I've been the DV STEP judge for the last 6 years, and it has provided me the greatest reward in my role as a judicial officer, because I firmly believe we are giving people the tools to stop using violence, and that their homes and the community are safer because of the program. DV STEP is a high-risk, high-needs program. It is for people with a long history of domestic violence arrests and or convictions. We don't require a prior conviction. As you all know, the fact that someone has not been convicted of a domestic violence crime does not mean that they are not, in fact, a high risk or high needs offender. The DV STEP program has been in place here at the Metropolitan Court for almost a decade and a half. I inherited the program from wonderful judges and teams ahead of me. And with the people I have on our team now, we are continuing to try to make it the best possible program for changing people's lives. And that's what we really hope to do here. Our program is for people who plead or are convicted of domestic violence crimes. We follow the treatment court model, which means that there are frequent meetings in court with the participants and the judge, that being myself. Over the last, of course, year and a half, we've been doing everything by Zoom, which has had its drawbacks and it's had some certain benefits, and I can talk about that a little bit more later. Our program can take up to about 20 or 25 people, though both Janae and Javier would tell you that that's probably a little bit too many. We bring people in at the beginning of the program. They are seeing their probation officer multiple times a month. They are beginning counseling. They're assessed with the New Awakenings team to make sure that we are giving them the services that they need. We're in the middle right now of reassessing those people who come to the program, both with a history of domestic violence and drug or alcohol substance abuse disorders. And we're trying to figure out the best way to get people started on the DV track, at the same time acknowledging that it's very difficult to begin counseling or working on changing your behavior if you also have a problem with a substance. So we're trying to, we had created 2 tracks for people, and now we're thinking that maybe that's not the best way of doing that, but we're working on always making our program better. But we acknowledge that people come to us with substance abuse issues, as well as a history of domestic violence. And it's my philosophy that for a lot of people, not necessarily all of them, but for a lot of people, the source of their violence is probably the same reason they use alcohol or drugs, and that we need to treat all of the person at the same time in order to get them to change their behavior, whether it's alcohol or the use of violence. We assess people at the beginning of when DV STEP is brought up as a possible resolution to a case. We screen people to make sure that, and we use a court clinician who does a mental health assessment, because we cannot we're not geared for people with substantial mental health issues or the people we may, those with personality disorders or anyone for whom we have concerns that our program would just make a better batterer. That's Dan's phrase, that there are some people with such personality disorders that our program would not help them and in fact give them more tools to be abusive to their partner. So we try to do an assessment to make sure that we're taking people into the program that we believe we can help. We take people who are male and female, though obviously with our program does skew male, but we have had women in the program, and we have 2 women in our program right now. Our program, we work with people who've ranged in age from barely out of their teens to men in their 60s who've been involved in domestic violence relationships where they've been the abuser for years. And so we have an attitude towards taking people into our program that it's, our court is one where we're going to over admit people into the program because there is not an equivalent program here in Bernalillo County at the felony court level. And my philosophy has been that if we don't help these people, who will? Because we know that even if this victim figures out her own safety plan and she is safer, she's away from this man, that he will have a new partner. So we need to intervene for him and for his new partner, or for if they don't want to stay in a relationship, or if they have children together, for the sake of the children and for the sake of the victim. Our program has multiple components and multiple people on our team. We have Mr. Flores from New Awakenings, and the folks at New Awakenings do both the domestic violence treatment as well as the substance abuse treatment. We have 2 people from the courthouse that are both on our call today, and that's Mr. Aguirre and Ms. Hernandez, who are the probation officer and the program director. We have a on-staff court clinician, MSW level, who does the assessments before we determine whether someone should be taken into the program. And then they are reassessed once they get to a New Awakenings to make sure that they're getting the proper counseling there. Also part of the team and very important to the team are representatives from the district attorney's office and representatives from the public defender's office. Obviously, for most of our participants, most of the defendants here in Bernalillo County, and no doubt where you are all too, if you're not in Bernalillo County, your defendants are most likely to be represented by your public defender's office, which means that it's important that they're on the team and they're on board with what we are doing as a alternative to incarceration. Because incarceration may keep her safe for 6 months or 1 year, but he's going to come out the same person he was before. And we need to make things be different for them. One unique part of our program is that counseling is available at no cost to the victim and to any children that may be involved in the relationship, whether it's stepchildren or one or both of them. Counseling is provided, and that is free of cost. It's not mandated. It's offered to the victim. The program, because of grants and the support of the state of New Mexico, is also free for the defendant. That means that a scram bracelet we might put on to monitor alcohol use is also free to the defendant. The GPS units that we may put on, depending on the charges and the concern for victim safety, is free for the defendant. The counseling is free for the defendant. We are using this program and making sure that it's available to the widest audience, and so that nobody is ever turned away because of their inability to pay for their counseling, their GPS or their scram bracelet. We want people to be safe, and we want them to get the services that they need. So DV STEP follows the treatment court model, which means that I have a team and that we meet monthly or bi-monthly, depending on our schedules. And we talk about the participants and how they're doing. The participants sign all appropriate waivers so that the counselor representative from New Awakenings, Mr. Flores, or whoever else comes that week, can tell us how they're doing, what they're talking about, how they're doing in group, how they're doing in individual. We have the drug and alcohol testing, so we know if they're refraining from using substances. We have our probation officers who meet with them as well, and the entire team will talk about the defendants to see how they're going, see how they're doing, whether there's been an improvement in their behavior, how they're dealing with the issues of making the necessary changes in their lives. We also have the court proceedings, and the treatment court model follows, and the research on this has been very well documented, that for a lot of participants in treatment court, they've never been praised by someone in authority. They've never been told you're doing a good job. They've never been asked, how are you, by somebody in a position of authority. And so what becomes very vital for the success of our participants is contact with me about how they're doing. What are their struggles? How are they staying sober? What's keeping them busy? And speaking with them between 2 and 4 minutes every session is actually shown to be a predictor of their success in the program and their success overall after they're out of the program. The treatment court model is used all across the world for keeping people off of drugs, out of jail, and we're using it here as a response to domestic violence. There's only a couple of courts in the country who use a treatment court model for domestic violence, specifically cases. There's courts that do compliance, but very few are following the treatment court model. We're seeing a movement within the veterans courts to also, since the veterans are coming back and getting involved in the system because of domestic violence, the vet court model is also bringing in domestic violence, veterans with domestic violence charges. And so we're seeing some use of this way of addressing people who are in the criminal court system, a way of addressing their needs so that they're no longer just being incarcerated and that they're being treated. We use
Cosgrove, I just
yes,
want to say we've got about 2 more minutes.
Oh my goodness, I'm so sorry. See, I told you, Dan's laughing because he knows I will go on and on and on. Let me just tell you some of our modalities. We use CYFD Batterer Intervention Program authorized by New Mexico. We also have our participants complete MRT and Seeking Safety. They're also, we have the ability to require IOPs before they start treatment in order to make sure that they're sober and are in a place where they can get the help that they need. We are extraordinarily proud of our program. We were just looking at our statistics the other day, and we have a graduation rate of about 75%, and our recidivism rate is less than 20%, which means that most of the people who come through our program are no longer court involved, and we keep our statistics up going on. And see, those are the statistics for the 6 years that I've been on this program. We're really lucky. In Taos, they're also working at beginning a DV step program there. If any of you have any want more information about our program, I'll volunteer Javier. He's happy to talk to you about doing something in your district, in your neck of the woods, and I'm more than happy to talk to any judge who's interested in doing this. If there are any questions, I will end. And again, as I told David earlier, I have no problem, and he would just have to stop me. Thank you all very much.
Thank you. Thank you, Judge Cosgrove. I am going to have us hold off on the questions until everyone, and until the 3 of you present, and hopefully Judge Blankenship will be able to get off the bench. and join us. But I'm going to quickly help Judge Hines make a switch to presenting mode. And yes, we are in the same place. Oh, now over here. Okay.
This way. Okay. Thank you, David.
Yep.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Libby Hines, and I had the privilege of serving as a judge in the 15th District Court, which is a very similar jurisdiction to Judge Cosgrove Aguilar, for the past 28 years. I retired November 1st of 2020, but I still remain active on several national organizations, one of which I see Judge Cosgrove Aguilar at, and several state boards that deal with domestic violence. Before being elected judge in 1992, I was a prosecutor in our county for about 15 years. So I've been in criminal law for about 43 years, but have a real passion for this area, just like I'm guessing most of you who are watching, if you took the time to watch today. What I've done is try to pull together just a few slides that I'm hoping may be of help for give you some ideas or things you want to do, things you don't want to do. But just based on my experience, I'm also active in the American Judges Association, so I have kind of a national perspective as chair of the Domestic Violence Committee. But I'm here not to say what to do, because I'm so impressed by what you're already doing, what Judge Cosgrove Aguilar is talking about, and what you'll hear about later in Taos as well. But just to, based on my experience, there are different ways of handling specialized domestic violence dockets and courts around the country. And I just want to throw out some ideas that work for us. I was very happy that when I retired in November, I never had a domestic homicide off my docket. And I really credit that for law enforcement, probation, prosecutors, defense attorneys, better intervention programs, and other people that really came together as a coordinated community response. I wish I were there in New Mexico. I've been there several times, and you have the most gorgeous skies, but I'm here in Michigan, but at least I'm with David Garvin. And I would just like to mention that David's been involved with our program for decades, and he is such a phenomenal resource. You have stolen him to New Mexico, but I hope you make good use of his incredible talents. He knows all the research. He knows what's going on around the country. He knows best practices, and he also is friends with most of the researchers, even internationally as well as locally. So you're really, in my opinion, very lucky to have him. And I hope you take advantage of that phenomenal resource. Let me advance a slide here. And David, it's not advancing on mine. Sorry. Oh, there we go. So as David would say, I don't have all the answers, but I certainly have heard most of the questions. And I'll just give you an example. Sometimes it is better to hear what other jurisdictions have done and learn from their mistakes as well as things that worked well. One of ours was we didn't include the defense bar at the beginning. We had a federal grant, which we had for over 20 years. We were one of 3 sites in the United States chosen by the Office on Violence Against Women from the U.S. Department of Justice to see what worked best in cases of judicial oversight. But don't tune out if you don't have that kind of money or grants, because our program started with 0 money and just a lot of enthusiasm. And I'm going to address that a little later on and hopefully give some of you ideas. Obviously, the program you heard about here is doing phenomenally well. But for those of you who don't have a program, maybe you want to consider it, or some of the ideas that I hope I bring to light. Bringing the defense to the table was actually a little challenging at first, but no one likes domestic violence. the defense and the prosecutor may disagree what constitutes domestic violence, but no one likes it. So they came to the table and made us much stronger because of it. Also, many of us, including me, think, oh, I think I have a really good idea. Let's just implement that. But as you can see, a coordinated community response is the way to go. I heard someone say, yes, you can change the world, but don't unless you know what you're doing. So it really does take a village to change a village, and a community response is the way to go. It's in your jurisdiction, if you don't already have one set up, if you can identify what I've heard called the internal champions, people with a passion, probably all of the people on this Zoom hearing. If you can bring people together, you need to invite what I call the queen bees, but you also need the worker bees who are actually doing the work. And as Judge Cosgrove Aguilar named some of her key people, they're essential, and that's what makes the courts run well. Some judges may not want to get involved because they see it as an ethical violation, or they can't do anything other than cases. I think that's really changing around the country. I didn't see anything in your New Mexico Code of Judicial Conduct that would prevent a judge, as long as you have both the defense and the prosecutor there, from talking about system changes. We can't talk about individual cases, but we can talk about system changes. If you have a judge who just refuses to be involved, there's still so much you can do. One of them is if you can get your judge to go to the best training, in my opinion, in the country for judges, which is in your state. It's run by the National Council on Juvenile Family Court Judges and several other organizations. I know Judge Cosgrove Aguilar is familiar, and she could link you. So could I. You'd be welcome to call me. But it's free to judges. You just pay your travel and room and board, and it's in Santa Fe. So it shouldn't be an issue. The other thing is, many places around the country, including my county, have come up with sort of a branch off of the coordinated community response and come up with a high-risk team where it does not include the judge, because they're identifying specific cases that need intensive work. The police, the prosecutor, and others meet and come up with an intense safety plan to protect people at incredibly high risk. We came up with, this is our, we spent the time, and I highly encourage you to spend the time to share a vision and make sure you're all on the same page. We knew as I've heard say, we cussed and discussed every word on this mission statement. We knew we couldn't end domestic violence. That's just not realistic, but we could end community tolerance of it and maximize the safety of victims and their families. And we all agreed that victim safety trumps even offender accountability. At all points, we have to do things that are safe for the victim and his or her children. In this case, I will refer to victims as her, because that's a huge lion's share. Obviously, there are some women who use force, but that's a subject for a different day. I applaud the fact that the New Mexico programs identify misdemeanors and address them. That's what we chose to do too. Before it's too late, before it makes a headline, it becomes a felony or a murder. There's a lot you can do with misdemeanors. And so I was really happy to see what's going on here in New Mexico. In our case, we identified misdemeanor domestic violence as homicide prevention. If we do our job right, we should be able to prevent homicides. And again, victim safety trumps even offender accountability. We created specialized dockets for just domestic violence case. And in our case, no one opts into the program like they do in our sobriety court, veterans treatment court, and mental health court, or other courts. I had a homeless court. In this case, if you're charged with domestic violence or a misdemeanor that involves domestic violence dynamics, you were in front of me for my court. But we coordinated the schedules. That way we had advocates could staff the court, the prosecutor, defense could have specialized training and work on every case. This is the rocket docket part. We wanted cases expedited because people could die, the worst case scenario. So we have a pretrial within 2 weeks, and the cases move along a lot further. The reason for that was because research shows that if there's going to be a new assault, it's going to happen within the first 30 days. Not to say it won't happen later as well, but this was a way to catch people's attention right at the beginning. And so DV cases were given priority in scheduling. When I first started, I'd have a courtroom full of driving while license suspended, drunk driving, illegal entry, all kinds of different cases. And the accused and the alleged victim at that time would be sitting, could be stared down. It's much better if you have them all together at one time, and it's a lot safer as well. We all agreed that we'd appoint attorneys at arraignment. In my opinion, that's not only protects the defendant's rights, but also is another layer of protection for victims, because when they leave the courtroom, the defense attorney can explain to his or her client the conditions, how serious they are, and that the judge will enforce them. We do have a default position of no contact unless there's some affirmative showing that it's safe. But again, we'll have the pretrial hearing within 2 weeks. We can modify an order if it's not appropriate. We keep the cases. We have frequent court reviews, just like Judge Cosgrove Aguilar, to enhance accountability. Probation is key here. And you'll be meeting at the next series with my former domestic violence probation officer, Jim Henderson, and you'll see why he did such a great job. And I had a current one who's still at the court, David O'Black. The key to me is to get victim input if she wishes to give it, and if it's in a safe way to gather it at every stage, because I can easily check if the person went to the battery intervention program, if that person paid fines and costs, but how's it really going at home? Has some other type of abuse escalated or not? So we have ways that probation will collect victim input. If there's a conviction, a long-term battery intervention program was ordered. I think yours on your state are 26 weeks. In ours, we did with David Garvin's program, in particular, the Premier Battery Intervention Program, 52 weeks. Okay. Oh, 52 as well in New Mexico. Great. We expected immediate enrollment and made ways to make sure that was done, with release of information being faxed over and confirmed right away that it met state standards. And we had immediate graduated sanctions for noncompliance. Doesn't have to be harsh, but needs to be consistent. And it's just a matter of making clear that the person is required to follow the orders that we've set, because we've hopefully made good orders in place. As I said, no contact was the default, but it doesn't fit everyone. And there are many times where it could be modified at pretrial or at sentencing, during probation. But again, I had such great faith in my DV probation officer and the advocates. Obviously, I couldn't ask an advocate from our shelter how it was going, or even acknowledge her or what was going on. But the prosecutor had an advocate. I could hear from that person and all of the group with the defense attorney and the prosecutor to know what was the most informed decision. If I modified, it was likely no contact, except in some form of writing, where there was documentation by email. Sometimes it was helpful for child visitation and other things like that. Sometimes people really wanted contact. It appeared safe. There are no priors. But I didn't like lifting it for phone, because you don't know what's said. I like to have a written record by text or email. If I could tell judges anywhere one thing they could do, Jackie Campbell, who is the leading expert on dangerousness around the country, she said if judges would just take firearms, you could reduce domestic homicides by 10 to 13%. So we always took guns and ammunition. It's also important that our orders are clear. And this is formally the plain English group. As you can say, lawyers and judges tend to speak in legalese. And sometimes I've seen an arraignment where a judge did a great job going through stuff, but never made eye contact, never asked if the person understood. And we need to make sure that our orders are clear so they can be enforceable. Here's an example of one of ours for not just saying no firearms, no use or possession of firearms, firearm components, ammunition, or other dangerous weapons, no being in the presence of other ones that had them, and a similar one for drugs, drug paraphernalia, or alcohol, which we also banned because that increases dangerousness. Also explained in detail the no contact order. People can't comply if they don't understand what the order is. And you can say no contact, but what does that mean? I had a guy ask if he could use the community garden, which was right outside the residence of his victim. And I said, no, you can garden elsewhere. There were lots of other places in our county that he could do that. But have an opportunity to explain in detail what that means. It's really important with social media. I always make sure to tell people, remove her from your contact list, any buddy lists, any other listserv, anything, because it will not be a defense to me if you accidentally contact her, because I had explained how to make it so it can't happen. Once this was made and explained, I never have people claiming, but she invited me over. It eliminated that because it was clear and people understood. Here are 2 forms. I'll just show you again, not to say they're the best anywhere, but just ideas of what we came up with our team, including the defense and prosecutor. The police would fill out this form for every misdemeanor. I would have thought they would be upset with this additional work, but they weren't, because they knew how important it was and how it really made a difference. If I saw someone was threatened to be killed by the person, that's a whole other ballgame than some other offenses. If there was access to a gun, the police knew that we actually used this information. The other form that we had was this form we gave the defendant at arraignment with the conditions. So we didn't just explain them in detail, we actually gave them a copy of it, and they left the courtroom with it. They signed that they understood, and if they violated, they knew they'd be arrested and go to jail. And our police were really good at arresting for violations. So people knew it was serious. The defense attorney could explain that. Everyone did. I think it minimized violations. Well, I know it did. Just want to say a word about procedural fairness, because I think that the old school of yelling at people and saying, now I'm in control, not you, and that type of thing is really old school. Research shows that people are willing to follow, are more likely to follow our court orders, even if it's against them, as long as they understand it and feel they were treated fairly and with respect. This is a cite to an article that I think should be required reading for all judges, and just talks about that for all types of cases, including domestic violence. So domestic violence isn't just a shame, it's a crime. What we say matters. There should be consequences, again, not harsh, but consistent, something to show people they're serious. We won't issue the order unless it fits for the case. And in terms of compliance reviews, I don't ever call them that, the ones I did, because I didn't want just compliance. I didn't want just someone to survive. I wanted them to thrive. So there were a lot of other supports. What did the person need? What did the victim need? All those things were addressed by my phenomenal probation officers. Again, ongoing victim input was key. Some things that I would say, I'm sure none of you do, but I think it's really important to tell others. Don't just minimize it because the victim dropped charges before. It may be a process. Don't forget the children. I would say that all judges know the orders we make in court don't just affect the adults in front of us, they all affect everyone in the home. And I always remember the story that I was told by an advocate from our shelter years and years ago. There was a nature program and that she was taking some children on. They went into the woods and she picked up a caterpillar and she showed it to them. And a little 5-year-old boy said, "Oh, it's a mommy caterpillar." And the advocate said, "How do you know it's a mommy caterpillar?" And the little boy said, "Because it's all curled up and afraid." So even if children don't see what's the domestic violence, they live in its aftermath. So I try to remember that your orders you make in court affect everyone in the home. And here are some other things I suggest you don't do. Here's a couple of slides I was hoping would be helpful, because we did all this without a grant, without any funding, but just some things you can do to expedite the court hearings, do court reviews to make sure your orders are being complied with, focus on victim safety to prevent homicides. Again, these are some things you can do. I will just highlight the second one, educating court staff. Our court staff, I felt like originally years and years ago, great staff, but victims would come in and they'd post the bond and I'd have people coming up to me, "Libby, did you see that she posted the bond for him?" Well, maybe she posted it because she wanted him out, but oftentimes she posted it because she had to. She knew what would happen if she didn't. So I wanted them to understand. So I took a video of a DV presentation I'd gotten from the American Judges Association and invited all of our clerks to come and watch, provided lunch. Every single one came. It made a huge difference that they understood that there's many reasons why people might look like they're doing something and it's not as it appears. That was really helpful. Having a specialized domestic violence probation officer is key as well, because he or she can know programs, know your resources, and make sure the judge is informed. We made procedures to promptly enforce any violations. It used to be the police would file a report that someone was arrested, he was back on the premises, it would go into a file and you wouldn't see it till the court hearing. We instead created a procedure that worked for us. It might not work for you, but we had them faxed to our offices, the DV judges, and we would get them immediately and either do an order to show cause or a bench warrant or take some action on the allegation. We also did a lot of cross training, and I think Jim will talk about this when you meet him, but we had people explain their roles, what they can do and what they can't do. We found there were a lot of unreasonable expectations. The police were frustrated because they would refer something to the shelter. They were really concerned about it and get no feedback. Well, then they learned they can't get feedback from them. It's all confidential. And just having those things explained and meet together made a huge difference. When I started in the 1980s, we had our first mandatory domestic violence ordinance. Again, David was involved. And the police weren't speaking to the advocates. I was made chair of it, the committee, only because not I'm so smart. I was a prosecutor at the time, but because I was the only one who was working with both the advocates and the police, they didn't speak to each other. By the end of the time, the police were calling the advocates for non-related cases because they found them so helpful. They would go to the scene of arrest. So I encourage you to take part in a coordinated or set up a coordinated community response. There's always a weak link. For a while, it was judges in our county. It could be others, but the other partners can shore it up. So I encourage people to get involved that way. There's some best practices about your battery intervention program, to visit the program, know what's going on, or have probation check. That's really important. We found we had a batterer-friendly group that we ended up not using at all, and they left town. So you need to make sure your program is working well. If your law allows it, we had jail available. Even if there were overcrowding rules on release, our sheriff would hold DV and stalking people. And I just like to point out a couple other innovations. ADA is the battery intervention program David Garvin created and ran, the premier program in our jurisdiction, and he set one up in the jail. So if we had people that were too unsafe to release to probation, they could go to the program in the jail. Also, he allowed us, if we had a really dangerous person, but not dangerous enough to put in jail, and for many reasons that wouldn't be safe for her and she didn't want it, then I could have him out of the house more often, and he'd pay for one session per week, but he could go 2 or 3 times, not unlike what you might do with a drug court with AA. And again, frequent judicial review, some sanction for any violation. I applaud all of you for spending time and listening to me and the other judges today, and just want to wish you good luck. Thank you.
Okay, everybody, I'm gonna just help unshare the screen. And I am so happy that we are joined by Judge Blankenship to finish out the rest of the presentation portion of this. And I'm sorry, I said Blankenship, I'm sorry, Judge. Blankenhorn, there's another judge that I know who has a similar name, but different. So I'm gonna ask you to go ahead and let's see, if you can go ahead and unmute.
Okay.
And there you go. And we've got you still on the bench. Thank you so much for being here. Your timing was perfect. We can have you go ahead and finish out your portion of the presentation, and then we'll have time for lots of conversations.
All right. Well, I appreciate, though it was against your will, I appreciate your flexibility. The court did run long this afternoon, so thank you all, and apologies in advance to all the viewers if I repeat any information that has already been provided by the previous judges, but I have been asked to speak to you today about the process of creating a treatment court. So my name is Judge Blankenhorn, and I am a very recent member of the bench. I only started in 2020, so I'm sure you've gotten all of the wealth of information from my predecessors who are far more experienced judges than I. But since taking the bench, I have begun the process of starting a domestic violence treatment court, and so can relate to you that procedure for New Mexico at least. I did work in domestic violence when I was an attorney, beginning all the way back in law school with my first client, and then on to prosecution with the Second Judicial District Attorney's Office, briefly with the public defender, and then before being appointed, I did work with the Community Against Violence up here in Taos, representing domestic violence survivors and sexual assault survivors in their efforts to obtain restraining orders and also related family law cases. So my chief judge and the CEO of our court, knowing my background in domestic violence, approached me with the idea of creating a treatment court. And being very new to the bench and not knowing at all what I was getting myself into, I jumped at the chance. So we began basically, we had to begin the process by seeking funding. And in doing so, we had to provide any of the grant providers, any of the local government entities that we've been asking for money with a why. And I would recommend that you start there. Your grant applications will require that anyway. I imagine most, if not all of you, have more experience than I do in obtaining grants. So we dove into research on the domestic violence treatment courts throughout the country. And we also looked into the data in our county. And I think the data in particular turned out to be very persuasive with everybody. We found when we've looked at the last 3 to 4 years in Taos County. Let's see, we found that there were roughly 1,000 911 calls related to domestic violence. Everybody here knows that it's a extremely underreported crime anyway. Of those 1,000, about 200 to 250 incidents resulted in petitions for domestic violence restraining orders. And then there were about 100 cases per year, criminal cases filed in the county. So of those 100 cases, the prosecution, there were about 3 to 5 per year that ended up in guilty pleas or convictions. So clearly the enormity of the problem in Taos County has not been addressed by criminal prosecution in the traditional sense. And that is the argument that we presented both to the New Mexico Sentencing Commission, which did end up giving us a grant, as well as the Taos County Commission, which they also did end up giving us money. So I would encourage anybody to start with some of those numbers. I know that David has mentioned to us, I'm not sure if he spoke to you about this earlier, but our prosecution rate is statewide is about 8%. And we are number 2 in the nation for domestic homicide. Those numbers alone can be extremely persuasive to anybody you are seeking funding from. In addition to the problem, we also worked on emphasizing the recidivism reduction that this type of program offers. There's plenty of data to be found, and I think that was probably covered by some of the previous judges regarding why and how well treatment courts work, but I do encourage you to include that in any sort of persuasive situation that you are in when you are trying to get funding for one of these courts. In addition to just basic justice, which is something all courts have an interest in, we also have the issue of the added benefit of having the potential of bringing defendants back into society as productive members. And then finally, and very importantly, if not most importantly, we want to keep the survivors, the alleged victims, safe. And I don't think that, at least here in Taos County, our traditional prosecution, our traditional criminal justice means of addressing it are doing so. And then also when you're talking to any elected official, it never hurts to talk about money. Reducing recidivism does affect everything from the 911 call center to the law enforcement agencies to the detention centers, the court, the district attorney's office, the public defenders, probation, and it goes on and on and on. All the other ancillary services that are a part of our universe. So once we persuaded some people to give us some money, we continued on to the team building. Now that was also a part of the initial efforts. You need to be able to show that you have support from your criminal justice partners in order to even get those grants off the ground anyway. So that's an ongoing effort. The beginning, this has ended up to be an intense amount of meetings, and they are ongoing in trying to bring people together who are normally adversaries. So that has been an interesting part. We began with the district attorney's office. You need the district attorney's office to make sure that it's a possibility at all. You need them on board to get your defendants into the program. You need buy-in from the public defender, because without the public defender, nobody's going to be able to convince your defendants to come into the program. More members of our team include law enforcement officers. I just had a meeting at lunchtime with our chief of police, convincing him to join our team as well. We have the sheriff, the Taos County Sheriff's Department, a representative from adult probation and parole, several mental health care providers, and our batterers intervention program coordinator, as well as a community representative who has a unique perspective as community representative because she works specifically with school children whose parents are involved in criminal justice, either as alleged victims or as defendants. So the team building is extremely important. It has proven to be an ongoing effort since we began. I think we began efforts back in springtime. There have been many telephone calls, meetings, text messages, emails, on and on and on. But now that we have the team gathered, it is actually incredibly inspiring, because we have all of these people in one room who are working on doing the work that you all do and trying to solve this really big problem that has hitherto remained unaddressed, almost essentially unaddressed. Let's see. Oh, finally, we are hiring a surveillance officer just to work with our participants. Just going to put a little plug, because the courts are not the only, or restaurants are not the only ones suffering a labor shortage. If you know anybody who would like to apply for that job, or if any of you out there would like to apply for that job, please contact Carl Brooks at the 8th Judicial District. Once the team building was done, we then began the process of our certification with the Administrative Office of the Courts. Now we are about a couple of weeks away from becoming certified, so we're almost there. That does require, let's see, I think we have 6 weeks of training, 2 hours a week with them, with the entire team. And I will tell you right now, if you are a judge or any other participant in the community who wants to begin one of these treatment courts, talk to the AOC, the Administrative Office of the Courts, their treatment court arm. That is an incredible team. I am blown away by how many resources, time and attention, and how effective they are at their job. So start there, because they've been an incredible resource to us, and they are actively helping us with the certification, not just telling us what we need to do and slapping our wrists when we do it wrong. So let's see here. Yeah, we are 2 weeks away. In addition to that, one of the best practices that I don't know if it's already been mentioned is that everybody, and actually it's the requirement in our policies and procedures, everybody does have to have training within 6 weeks of beginning participation in a treatment court. So our team and several representatives from throughout the county that also work in the 8th Judicial District did attend the National Drug Court Conference in Maryland this year. That is a week-long affair. It is very intense, up to 8 hours a day, but it is a wealth of information. And I would also recommend, if you are interested in this type of activity, that you attend that training. Probably do it yearly, because the science and the data does get updated, and the best practices along with them. We have continued efforts now. Our next job, once we get our certification and actually begin to accept our participants, we have to continue to work on establishing some permanent funding sources from the legislature. So, you know, that is one aspect of this that I hadn't considered. If you're considering approaching a judge, if you are a judge, keep in mind that you will be doing, you will have to engage in continued efforts to advocate for your court and the community out with the legislatures. We're meeting with senators and representatives and town council, county commission. Once that permanent funding, hopefully we will be able to get it in the fiscal year 2023, I think we're looking at. That's an ongoing effort and part of the project here. So don't go in blind on that one like I did. And then finally, you have to make sure that your policies and procedures are in place. And of course, you don't have to reinvent the wheel, and lawyers out there will already be familiar with plagiarizing from their colleagues with gleeful abandon. And we did look at the DV steps, Metro Court policies and procedures. We used them. Thank you very much for that. And we also looked at our drug court, our current drug court policies and procedures here in place in the 8th. And finally, I've looked as much as I could at other domestic violence courts throughout the country. And from that, we have cobbled together what I think is a pretty good set of documents that we will share with anybody who is engaging in a similar endeavor. Just contact myself or Gino or Carl Brooks. We'll all be happy to do so. That also requires continued negotiation with the parties as well. You've got your memorandums of understanding with the mental health care providers that they're contracted by the court. Attorneys do love to argue, and so we've been negotiating between the public defender and the district attorney to determine our eligibility criteria. And that is an important process for everybody to be a part of. And I think we've about hammered it out, but that does take some time, and it does take a lot of collaboration, a lot of editing, and a lot of back and forth. So I think I even got us in under 15 minutes, and that's about it. It's a pretty easy process. And now that we're going to be almost done with that, the hard work begins when we begin the court. So I thank you all for listening to what is probably a bit of a garbled presentation this afternoon as a result of a long day in court. I thank you all for doing the jobs that you do, and I will, like the other judges, remain online to answer any questions that you might have for me. So thank you, David. And again, I apologize for being late.
Thank you, Judge Blankenhorn. And now is the time really where we can talk amongst ourselves. You can ask a judge. You can follow up any questions about the information that the three of the presenters talked about. We can talk amongst ourselves. I'm just going to open it up for any questions that you have. And switch it to gallery view here. So if you know how to, hopefully in November of 2021, everybody knows how to raise their little Zoom hand. If not, put something in the chat. You can unmute if you want to just start talking, and we'll do our best to keep up with you. If I had that soundtrack to you know, I'd play that for you.
Okay, my name is Rod. I'm from Nambe Pueblo. I'm the Domestic Violence Prevention Coordinator. Thank you, judges, and thank you, David, for having this CCR, a unique opportunity for many of us. I'm a tribal program, so there's a lot of challenges here, you know, as far as our law enforcement being a Bureau of Indian Affairs. But I wanted to ask you as far as that, you know, I mean, that's where the first responder comes in with anything else is the relationship with the law enforcement that you have. I know there's city, there's municipal, there's sheriff, and there's state. So what is the relationship and how has that become to be built in doing the work that you're doing and all the other components that fall in, because that's been our challenge, you know, is law enforcement. Thank you.
Who'd like to field that question?
I can take a stab at it.
Okay.
I would just say, and that's such an important point. I would say one of the issues was law enforcement is so incredibly critical because that police report is used for everything and including custody issues later, whatever. So training on that. So it was a matter of engaging in our community anyway, engaging all the chiefs of police. We have 10 different jurisdictions in police, but they were all willing to come to the table. And what we found was having a designated domestic violence officer at the sheriff's department and the 2 city and township leading biggest cases, they agreed to do it. And so they would kind of really help and specialize. And then at one point, we also had a designated sheriff's deputy who would represent all the smaller jurisdictions who didn't have enough cases to justify an individual domestic violence officer. But that is an excellent point, and it's so important. And I just wanted to share what worked for us. I don't know if it would work in your jurisdiction or not, but it was actually a lot of, like Judge Blankenhorn was saying, calling, talking to people. I personally called a lot of the chiefs of police, the sheriff, and other people to bring them to the table. So it certainly can be done, and it's a huge issue, and like you point out, incredibly important.
I'll just add on there that you know, I think that in that regard, there's a natural kind of resistance that you may encounter from law enforcement. But again, that's where I think the numbers really help. You're getting buy-in from them, because a lot of times the accountability is important, and we are offering treatment courts do offer accountability. And if you point out that kind of the prosecution rates, the disparity between the complaints and those, because I know that that's where a lot of frustration lies with law enforcement. They feel like they keep sending stuff to the court. People just get kicked out of jail and the cases get dismissed. So I think that that's a really good way of talking to them about that to get their buy-in, and then their presence really is huge.
Thank you. And Javier, thank you for responding to Janie. Hopefully, Janie, look in your chat if you haven't seen that yet. There's some information for you. And hopefully I'm going to say your name correctly, Elisa. But Elisa, can you unmute and ask your question? Elisa Morgan.
Sure. So my question was just, what is the best way to get in touch with the local judges and law enforcement? It just seems there's not a lot of communication between us. They see the cases and then they just refer them to us, and there's just not an open line of communication there. And I'm wondering how to start that.
Let me just start by saying I am so glad that you're asking that, because I think people really struggle with, how do I start to have a relationship with this person who's almost magical? You know, they appear in this flowing robe and then they disappear, and they have all this power and authority. And I remember, and it was Libby who really taught me, judges are people and you can actually talk to them. Holy smokes, I didn't know that. So I'm so glad that you asked that question.
Well, I'll jump in here since nobody else did, but I know that in our jurisdiction, we simply, service providers often just send an email invitation to either my email address or the the Taos Magistrate email address. Sometimes people will come to the court with an invitation to, so I'm sorry, what was it that, and what do you work for, Ms. Morgan?
Sorry, I work for a family crisis center in Farmington, New Mexico.
So yeah, in that case, I would just find out the email to the clerk's email and send a letter. That's how people often contact me. If you go in straight up to the chief judge, say, I really would like to give some information to the judges about the services we're providing or whatever it is that you're trying to have the conversation about. Sometimes they'll even facilitate a little Zoom meeting. I know that David has already experienced the difficulty of herding judges. It's worse than herding cats because our schedules are so erratic and hard to pin down. But I think that just reaching out directly to the court does, it at least works up here in Taos. And we're always glad to hear what's going on, because sometimes we do feel like we're separated from the community. I'm like, oh, there's these people doing, you know, offering this service now. I wish somebody had told us.
I think offering to present is always a good opener. We'd like to present to your judges about what we're doing or what we've changed, or having an open house and sending invitations. And then if you're interested in seeing if the judge is receptive to a any kind of treatment court, you can see if they come to the table when you offer education to them, you know, and say, I was just at this great presentation and they were talking about something that they're doing in Taos or something they're doing in Albuquerque. Would you be interested in that? And that's a way to see if gauge interest. But offering to present about what you're doing, offering to talk about what your procedures are, about when they do come, who do you report back to, all of those kinds of things are information that judges could have, and you can see how receptive they are to building those bridges between treatment and the courts.
If I can piggyback on that too, I would say another thing you could try is identify, like I call it, internal champions, people that are passionate about the work as well as you, and have a prosecutor and a defense attorney first, and or your sheriff or law enforcement, and then approach the judge if you are expecting to meet with resistance. And also you need to make clear, in my opinion, when you're going to invite the judge, that it's not about a particular case, because that'll be an instant turnoff. We can't talk about that, but that like about a system approach, or like the excellent programs you've heard about today in your state with the two judges here. And I would just suggest you could actually have more than just your agency involved. And sometimes that will appeal to judges as well.
Elisa, is that what you're looking for? Or?
That's helpful. And I think a lot of it too is the scheduling. The judge is really busy, or the commissioner is really busy here. And so it's just really difficult to get everybody's schedule to align. But I really like the idea of what Judge Cosgrove said, is the open house, and kind of just letting the commissioner know that we're not here to talk about cases. We just want to talk about what we're doing and how we need help, and if you have any questions. So thank you, that was helpful.
Good. Okay, folks, we've still got a little over 15 minutes, 15, 16, 17 minutes. And now's your opportunity. So put it in the chat, or just turn on your mic and let us know.
I've been involved. I'm Lester Brasher. I'm with Sandoval County. I've been involved in several drug court type programs. And one of the things that I knew, unless things have changed, was that there was a caveat against violent offenders, clients who had a history of violent offenders. How do your programs get through that?
For our program, if they're too violent, we won't take them. I think one of the things that was said, you know, we're working a misdemeanor level. We're trying to get people before they've moved beyond misdemeanor domestic violence. We've been taking some people accused of felonies, but if there's significant felonies, stabbings, broken bones, we will screen them out because we don't think our program can work with them. But I agree that it's hard to find a place for that kind of violent offender because our district court does not have a similar program that we have here. And so I know that people can be very successful running programs in prisons for domestic violence, where you really do have people that are in prison for, you know, broken bones, attempted murder, those kinds of things, where you can try to give them that kind of appropriate counseling so they change when they come out. But our program just isn't equipped. And I don't think we have enough time with them because we're a misdemeanor court. Usually most of our people only have a year or a year and a half time. That kind of change, I think, probably requires more than a year of counseling. You're really talking about having jurisdiction over someone for a much longer time than I do necessarily with the program to get to someone who has gotten to the point where they thought it was okay to stab their partner. But yeah, that's a gap, right? Because if they go to jail for 5 years, they still come out, right? And that partner may not be safe, or the next partner certainly isn't safe if they haven't gotten the necessary treatment for their behavior to change in the future.
Thank you, Lester. That's definitely a concern. You know, the general public perception of felonies and prison is lock them up and throw away the key, which doesn't happen. You know, that somebody might serve a long time, but just like Judge Cosgrove said, they're going to get out and they're going to return to the community. And what do we have in place to help them with that? Mm-hmm. You know, including parole, but beyond parole.
Mm-hmm.
All right. What other questions? What do you need in your community that you don't have that we could talk about and strategize? Hey, Ron, it's good to see you.
Thank you. Hey, I have a question for any of the judges running a domestic violence court. Is it open to anyone? In other words, if you have a couple who has maybe the seeking an order of protection, one of them, and they have never been charged with a crime, but they want to get into some treatment, could the family court perhaps make participation in the domestic violence court a condition in some form or fashion in those orders of protection where people don't have criminal charges?
So I'll take this one, Ron, since you're in my jurisdiction. Good to see you again.
You too.
So yeah, we're working with Commissioner Coleman about her being able to do referrals, and absolutely. And you know what, if you want, I can share with you the eligibility criteria that we've drafted and send that over to you, as well as any of the other information, so you can have a little bit more details about it. But we were hoping that you all would negotiate some referrals from the DV court or the family law court. Yeah. I think you're still muted.
I said, thank you very much. I would appreciate those documents, and I appreciate your willingness to send them over. Thank you.
For everyone, our program is only available for people who are post-conviction. The DV STEP program is for people who are post-conviction, because the program is the carrot, the stick is the possible incarceration if they don't complete the program. And so people can only enroll in the program if they're in the criminal justice system. That's for DV STEP. For the early intervention program, people do not have to plead to that, but there have been criminal charges filed against them. The carrot for them is if they complete the program, then the charges are dismissed. And again, completion of the program is that's the carrot, that the criminal charges will be dismissed at the end of it. If they don't do the program, then the criminal charges are reinstated. And so for both of my programs, it is for people who are criminal justice involved, not for somebody who's just like, holy moly, I need help. Or there's just an order of protection and process, which is a civil process, not a criminal process. And I also wanted to recognize, because I didn't see she was on the call, the probation officer for our early intervention program is also on the call today. She is Cynthia Castillo. And I know from when we do the graduation from our participants that she does extraordinary work, and that she is absolutely key to the success of the early intervention program, is the hard work that Cynthia puts in for the participants, and her ability to connect with them and get them enthused about completing the program.
And thank you, Ron, for asking that question. I think the family courts are just full of opportunities for intervention programs to assist. And we can and should be making inroads into that. And it's kind of, I think it's one of the final frontiers. That and the faith community are the two final frontiers that we really haven't gotten that far into, but we need to. Looks like you would agree, Rachel Coleman, so that's great. I'm wondering if, this is a question for Judge Hines, if you have a case example, the phrase you used on one of your slides, which, by the way, if people would like those slides, we can make those available to you. We can put that in out in an email to you. If you have a case example of how victim safety trumps offender accountability, if something comes to mind.
I'm just trying to think off the top of my head. There have been so many, but I can think of one case where the defendant was on probation and went on the couple was back together, and he was in a battery intervention program, and they traveled out of state for a holiday. And along the way, he punched her in the face in the car. And so she called my DV probation officer, and he said, well, he's going to go to jail. The judge isn't going to tolerate a new assault. And she started crying and said she wished that she'd never called, that if he goes to jail, they lose their house. They had a new baby, so she wasn't able to work outside the home, et cetera. And so what happened is my DV probation officer met with the shelter advocates and some other people. And the short story, came up with a plan where I had him out of the house a lot, going to battery intervention multiple times per week. On holidays, he was in jail, but he kept his job, kept the house, and ultimately finished the battering intervention program. And she ultimately wrote a letter at the end and thanked us, saying that she felt that we experts, I wouldn't call myself an expert, but she called all of us experts, had worked with them, and she felt like they tried everything, and she was now feeling she could move on. And, so I consider that ultimately a success story.
Great example, thank you. Well, I'm going to start wrapping it up unless there's anybody who's just waiting for the right moment to raise your hand. So this is the fourth in the series of our 7-part series for the CCR trainings. I want to say a couple of things about the other ones coming up. Judge Hines mentioned the upcoming probation one. We also have a session on research, and that is both to help us know what the research says, but to also help us understand research. Not everyone understands research. Some of us pick it up, and it's a great way to deal with insomnia. So you pick up a piece of research and boom, I'm asleep. But the other thing that we're looking at is there's a 3-day training. Yes, that's intensive, and yes, please reach out to your supervisors, your colleagues, your coworkers, your community members, those who you collaborate with, because the 3-day training, which is going to take a different, you're signed up for this using a certain link, and that link is set to a time and a day for these sessions. But the 3-day one is on the coordinated community response. This is going to the birthplace of the coordinated community response, which is Duluth, Minnesota, and Scott Miller from the Domestic Abuse Intervention Project, our friends in Duluth, or the Duluthians, as I like to refer to them, will be leading a 3-day training on the coordinated community response, which I think it's a lot to ask of you. I know it is, but it's going to give you a lot as well. So plan on that. It's all part of the information that you see coming out. I do want to invite in these last few minutes the Pam Wiseman, who's the executive director of the New Mexico Coalition. Pam, if you'd like to say any words of welcome or thank yous or goodbyes to anybody, and I invite you in.
Thank you. I almost made it through without having to speak. It was right down to the wire. It was close, but no such. No, I just want to thank our judges for being here and for taking the time. So much experience and insight. And I know that all the people on the call really appreciate it. And thank you to all of you who attended. As David said, I know this takes a lot of time, but we have so much opportunity now, I think, in New Mexico to really make a difference. And so thank you for being a part of that. And thanks to David for creating this. So I just said everything I've already put in the chat, but anyway, yeah. Thank you all.
Thank you, Pam. Thank you.
Good to see everyone.
It's 4 minutes before the end, but I want to thank our faculty for today, Judge Rosemary Cosgrove Aguilar, Judge Sarah Blankenhorn, and retired Judge Libby Hines. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you all. Have a great rest of your day.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.